The hall was filled with soft golden light that reflected from the crystal chandeliers above. Round tables were covered with white cloth, and glasses sparkled as guests laughed and talked. A grand piano stood near the center of the room, shining under the lights like it was part of the decoration. Most people barely noticed it anymore. It had been played earlier by a hired musician, and now it sat quiet, almost forgotten. Waiters moved carefully between the tables, carrying trays of drinks and small plates of food. The sound of quiet music played from speakers in the background. Everything felt polished and expensive. People wore fine suits and long, elegant dresses. Their voices were confident, their laughter controlled. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to belong, at least on the surface. Near the entrance, a young girl stood still for a moment. She had come with someone who worked at the venue. Her clothes were simple, clean but simple. She looked around carefully, trying not to draw attention. Her eyes were not on the guests or the food. They were fixed on the piano. She had never seen a grand piano this close before. She had only seen them in videos and from far away in school events. The black surface looked smooth like glass. The lid was slightly open, showing the strings inside. The keys looked brighter than any she had ever touched. For a few seconds, she simply watched it from where she stood. People passed by her without noticing. A group of guests nearby laughed loudly at something someone had said. The sound made her shift a little, as if she felt she was standing in the wrong place. But her eyes returned to the piano. She slowly walked closer. Each step felt heavier than it should. She knew this was not her event. She knew these were not her people. Still, something inside her pulled her forward. She stopped beside the bench. Her heart beat fast. She glanced around to see if anyone was watching. Most guests were busy talking. A few noticed her standing near the instrument, but they did not say anything yet. She reached out her hand. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a brief second, as if asking permission. Then she gently pressed one key. The sound was soft but clear. It echoed lightly in the open space. A man at the nearest table turned his head. A woman beside him followed his gaze. They looked at the girl, then at each other. Another key was pressed. This time, the sound blended with the noise of conversation. But it was enough to make more people notice. A small smile appeared on the girl's face. The touch of the keys felt different from anything she had known. They were smooth and responsive. Not heavy. Not chipped. Perfect. She pressed a few more notes, slowly, almost carefully, as if she was afraid to disturb the air. A quiet chuckle came from behind her. Someone whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "Does she even know how to play?" Another voice replied, "Maybe she's just curious." A soft laugh followed. The girl froze for a moment. Her hand rested lightly on the keys. She had heard them. She always heard these kinds of comments. They were not new to her. She lowered her eyes and pulled her hand back slightly. Across the room, two younger guests were openly watching now. One of them smirked. "This should be interesting," he said, not kindly. The laughter was not loud, but it was enough. It spread quietly, like a ripple. The girl felt her cheeks grow warm. She became aware of how simple her shoes looked against the polished floor. She noticed how different she seemed from everyone else in the room. For a second, she thought about stepping away. She could walk back to the corner and pretend she had never touched it. No one had invited her to play. No one expected her to. She was just a girl standing in a room that did not belong to her. Another quiet laugh rose from a nearby table. She swallowed. Her fingers tightened slightly. Then she looked at the keys again. They were still there, waiting. The laughter had not damaged them. The whispers had not changed their sound. She took a slow breath. Her shoulders straightened just a little. In that small moment, something shifted inside her. Not anger, not pride, just a quiet decision. She moved closer to the bench and gently sat down. The movement caught more attention. Conversations began to slow. A few guests leaned back in their chairs to get a better view. One person even shook his head lightly, amused. "Is this part of the program?" someone asked. "I don't think so," another replied. The girl placed both hands over the keys now. They hovered there, still and steady. Her breathing was slow, but her heart was racing. For a brief second, doubt tried to speak again. What if they were right? What if her hands forgot what they knew? What if she embarrassed herself completely? The room felt bigger than before, but so did her courage. She closed her eyes. The noise in the hall seemed far away now. The laughter, the whispers, the movement of glasses. It all faded behind the steady beat of her heart. She pressed the first real note. It rang out clearly, not hesitant, not random, intentional. A second note followed, then a third. The beginning was soft, simple, gentle. The nearest table grew quiet. A woman who had been mid-sentence stopped speaking. The melody began to form slowly, like a story being told in a low voice. The earlier smirks faded, replaced by small frowns of confusion. This did not sound like random pressing. It sounded like the beginning of something. The girl's fingers moved with more confidence now. Her back was straight, her face calm. The room no longer felt like it was watching her. Felt like it was listening. More heads turned. A waiter paused mid-step. The quiet music from the speakers was no longer noticeable. The simple notes she played started connecting into a melody that carried feeling. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was clear and steady, like someone speaking honestly. A man who had laughed earlier leaned forward in his chair. The girl did not open her eyes. She continued, and slowly, without anyone announcing it, the mood in the hall began to change. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had disappeared. Only the piano remained. Long before she ever stepped into that shining hall, music had already become part of her quiet world. She did not grow up around chandeliers or grand stages. Her home was small, with walls that carried the sounds of neighbors talking and traffic passing by. The paint on the ceiling had faded in places, and during heavy rain, water would sometimes tap lightly against the window like fingers asking to come in. But inside that small space, there was warmth. There was effort, and there was hope. In one corner of the living room stood an old keyboard placed on a simple wooden table. It had been bought secondhand from someone who no longer needed it. A few keys were slightly loose. One of them made a strange clicking sound when pressed too hard. The speakers were not very clear. Sometimes one side would stop working, and she would have to adjust the wire carefully until the sound returned. But to her it was not broken. It was magic. She was still very young when she first touched those keys. At first, she pressed them randomly, just to hear the different sounds. High notes made her smile. Low notes felt serious and deep. She did not know the names of the notes, and no one at home could teach her. Music lessons were expensive, and there were more important things to spend money on. Still, she was curious. Whenever she heard a song on the radio or from someone's phone, she would listen closely. After the song ended, she would walk to the keyboard and try to find the same sounds by ear. Sometimes it worked. Most of the time it did not. But she never gave up. There were evenings when the electricity would go out, and the room would fall into darkness. On those nights, she would sit near the window and imagine melodies in her head. She would move her fingers over the table as if the keys were there, practicing silently. Even without sound, she felt the music inside her. At school, there was an old piano in the assembly hall. It was rarely used. Once, during a break, she walked near it and gently touched one key. The sound filled the large room in a way her small keyboard never could. Felt bigger, fuller, alive. But before she could press another note, a group of students noticed her. "Do you even know how to play?" one of them asked, half laughing. She quickly stepped back and shook her head, even though it was not fully true. She knew something. She just did not know how to explain it. After that day, she only looked at the school piano from a distance. At home, things were not always easy. There were days when her parents looked tired from long hours of work. Bills were discussed in low voices at the kitchen table. She understood more than they thought she did. That was why she never asked for lessons. Never asked for anything extra. But one evening, her mother noticed her sitting quietly at the keyboard, repeating the same melody again and again. "You really love this, don't you?" she asked softly. The girl nodded without looking up. Her mother smiled, though her eyes showed worry. Then keep playing. Even if it's small, even if it's not perfect. Keep playing. Those words stayed with her. She began waking up earlier than everyone else just to practice. The morning light would enter the room slowly, and she would sit at the keyboard, careful not to press the keys too hard so she would not wake anyone. She taught herself simple songs first. Then she tried harder ones. She watched free videos online whenever she could. She replayed them again and again, studying how the fingers moved. Sometimes frustration made her close the keyboard lid harder than she meant to. Sometimes tears came when her hands refused to move fast enough. But every time she thought about quitting, she remembered the feeling of that big piano at school. The way the sound filled the space. She dreamed of sitting at a real grand piano one day. Not for fame, not for applause, just to feel that sound again. Months passed. Her fingers grew stronger. Her ears became sharper. She could now hear a melody once and slowly find it on the keys. She did not have perfect technique. She did not sit exactly the way trained musicians did. But she had something else. She had feeling. When she played, she did not think about who was watching. She thought about stories. About the way rain sounded at night. About her parents coming home tired but still smiling. About quiet mornings. About hope. Music became her way of speaking without using words. One afternoon, the person she had come with to the event mentioned that there would be a large gathering at the venue. Important guests. Beautiful decorations. Live music. She listened quietly. Will there be a piano? She asked carefully. Yes, came the reply. A big one. That single sentence stayed in her mind for days. On the evening of the event, when she first saw the grand piano shining under the lights, her chest felt tight. It was even more beautiful than she imagined. The curve of its body. The long row of perfect keys. The open lid showing strings like golden lines. She told herself she would only look. Only stand near it for a moment. But when she stood there, something deeper pulled at her heart. It was the same feeling she had when she first touched the school piano. The same feeling she had every morning at her small keyboard. Felt like home. Even when the laughter started, even when people whispered, part of her mind traveled back to that small room with the faded ceiling. To the early mornings. To the clicking key that needed gentle pressure. To her mother's quiet encouragement. She remembered practicing the same piece again and again until her fingers finally understood it. She remembered telling herself that one day, she would not be afraid. And now, sitting in front of the grand piano in that bright hall, she realized something important. The keys were different. The room was different. The people were different. But the music inside her was the same. No one in that hall knew how many hours she had spent practicing when no one was watching. No one knew how many times she had failed before getting a melody right. No one knew how badly she had wanted to touch a piano like this. They only saw a girl in simple clothes sitting where they did not expect her to sit. They did not see the journey behind her hands. As she played those first few notes in the hall, her mind was not thinking about the laughter. It was remembering her small keyboard at home. It was remembering the promise she made to herself, that if she ever got the chance to play on a real grand piano, she would not waste it. That chance had finally come, and she was not going to let it slip away. The first few notes floated gently through the hall, soft but steady. They did not rush. They did not shake. They carried a quiet confidence that slowly reached the far corners of the room. At first, people were unsure how to react. A few guests kept talking, thinking it would stop at any moment. Some still believed she was only pressing random keys. But as the melody continued, something changed. It began to sound familiar. Not because it was a famous song everyone knew, but because it felt real. It felt like something that had been practiced many times before. The girl kept her eyes lowered toward the keys. Her fingers moved carefully, almost respectfully, as if she understood that this piano was special. Each note connected smoothly to the next. There were no long pauses, no confusion, just a steady flow. A man who had laughed earlier slowly placed his glass down on the table. The smile on his face faded. He leaned forward slightly, listening more closely. Near the back of the hall, two women stopped mid-conversation. One of them tilted her head. "Wait," she whispered. "She's actually playing." The soft background music from the speakers was quietly turned off by one of the staff members who had also begun to listen. No one announced it. It simply happened. The melody grew a little stronger. Her left hand began to add deeper notes under the main tune. The sound became fuller, richer. It filled the space in a way that felt natural, not forced. The girl's shoulders relaxed as she continued. The fear she had felt moments earlier slowly melted away. In its place came something else. Comfort. This was familiar territory for her. Not the hall. Not the people. But the music. Her fingers now moved with more freedom. They traveled across the keys with smooth control. She was no longer just testing the piano. She was speaking through it. The room grew quieter. A waiter froze near one of the tables, tray still in his hands. He did not want to interrupt the sound. Even the small movements of chairs seemed to stop. One of the event organizers, who had been speaking near the stage, slowly turned around. First, he looked confused. This was not part of the planned program. But as he listened, his expression changed from concern to surprise. The girl reached a slightly faster section of the piece. Her fingers moved quickly now, but not carelessly. There was purpose in every motion. Her face remained calm, focused. She did not look up to see who was watching. She did not need to. The music had already done that. Across the room, someone quietly took out a phone and began recording. Another followed. Not out of mockery this time, but out of disbelief. The melody rose higher, then gently dropped into softer notes again. Felt like a story with emotion, like it was remembering something beautiful, then something painful, then something hopeful again. People who had been laughing earlier now sat completely still. One older guest, who had attended many formal events in his life, shook his head slightly in amazement. He had heard trained musicians perform in large halls. He knew the difference between noise and skill. What he was hearing now was not luck. It was practice. It was heart. The girl's breathing stayed steady. Inside, she felt something open up. The grand piano responded perfectly to her touch. The keys were smooth, sensitive. They allowed her to play softer than she ever could at home, and louder too, without harshness. For a brief moment, she almost smiled. Not because people were watching, but because this was the sound she had dreamed of. She reached a part of the melody that required both hands to move quickly together. Months ago, she had struggled with this section on her old keyboard. Her fingers would trip over each other. She would sigh and start again. Now, as she played it on the grand piano, her hands moved in perfect timing. The notes came out clean and strong. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the hall. The energy in the room shifted completely. It was no longer curiosity. It was attention. Full and honest attention. The event organizer slowly stepped closer to the piano, not to stop her, but to see her more clearly. He folded his arms and listened carefully. The melody softened again, becoming gentle and emotional. It felt almost like a whisper after a powerful sentence. The contrast made it even more beautiful. Some guests felt their eyes sting slightly, though they could not explain why. There were no lyrics, no story being told in words, but the feeling was clear. The girl pressed each note with care, letting it ring just long enough before moving to the next. She had learned that from hours of listening closely at home. In the silence of the hall, even the smallest detail could be heard. The earlier laughter now felt distant, almost unreal. A young child sitting near the front looked at her with wide eyes, completely still. For the first time that evening, the child was not restless. The girl moved into the final section of the piece. It was the part she loved most. The part that always gave her goosebumps when she played it alone. Her hands began to travel across the keys more boldly now. The sound grew wider, brighter. It filled every corner of the hall. Her back was straight. Her fingers were strong. She was no longer the girl who had hesitated beside the bench. She was a musician finishing her story. The final notes approached. The melody slowed slightly, building quiet tension. Then it rose gently one last time before landing on a clear, beautiful ending. Her fingers lifted from the keys. The last note hung in the air for a second. Then silence. Complete silence. No one moved. It lasted just long enough to feel powerful. The girl opened her eyes slowly. For the first time since she began, she looked up. What she saw was not laughter. It was stunned faces, open mouths, wide eyes. A room that had underestimated her only minutes ago now sat frozen in disbelief. And in that stillness, something important had changed forever. For a few seconds after the final note faded, no one seemed to remember how to react. The silence felt deep and heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when people realize they have just witnessed something unexpected and real. The girl slowly lowered her hands into her lap. Her heart was beating fast again, but for a different reason now. She had played the piece the way she always wanted to. She had not rushed. She had not stopped midway. She had not let fear control her fingers. She almost forgot where she was. Then the first sound came. A single clap. It echoed clearly in the quiet hall. Everyone turned toward the direction of the sound. An older woman sitting near the front had brought her hands together, her eyes shining. She did not look embarrassed. She looked proud. The clap was followed by another, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall filled with applause. It was not polite clapping. It was loud, strong, real. Some people even stood up from their chairs. The same guests who had whispered and laughed earlier were now clapping the hardest, as if trying to make up for something. The girl blinked, surprised. She was not used to applause. At home, when she finished playing, the only sound was the quiet hum of the room. Sometimes her mother would smile from the kitchen doorway and say, "That was beautiful." That was enough for her. But this was different. The sound of so many hands clapping at once felt almost overwhelming. She slowly stood up from the bench. For a moment, she did not know what to do with her hands. She simply looked at the piano, then at the people, unsure if this was truly meant for her. The event organizer stepped forward, still clapping. His expression was no longer confused. It was filled with respect. "That was incredible," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. The applause continued. Some guests exchanged looks with each other, their earlier expressions now replaced with quiet embarrassment. A few even shook their heads, as if surprised at themselves for judging too quickly. Near one of the tables, the man who had first laughed avoided eye contact. He picked up his glass again but did not drink from it. His smile was gone. In its place was reflection. The girl felt warmth spread across her face again. But this time it was not from shame. It was from disbelief. She had only wanted to touch a grand piano once. She had not expected all of this. Someone from the staff gently adjusted the bench back into place, as if preparing for another performance. A quiet voice from the crowd called out, "Play something else." A few others agreed. "Please, one more." The girl hesitated. She had not planned for more than one piece. The first one had taken all her courage. But as she looked around the hall, she noticed something important. The eyes watching her now were different. They were not judging. They were curious, encouraging, hopeful. She glanced at the piano again. It no longer felt like an object she was borrowing. It felt like something that had welcomed her. The organizer gave her a small nod, silently asking if she was willing. She took a slow breath and sat down again. The applause slowly faded into silence once more, but this time the silence felt lighter. She placed her fingers on the keys. Instead of playing something she had practiced many times, she decided to follow her heart. She began with a soft, simple melody, something she used to play at home when she felt calm. The notes were gentle and warm. They flowed easily from her hands, like a conversation between old friends. As she continued, she added small changes, tiny details that made the melody her own. She was no longer proving anything. She was simply sharing. The room responded. Smiles appeared on faces. A couple sitting near the back reached for each other's hands. A child leaned closer to the piano, resting his chin on his palms, completely absorbed. This second piece did not need to be dramatic. It did not need fast sections or powerful endings. It felt honest. While she played, something else began happening quietly in the background. The short videos recorded by guests were already being sent to friends. Messages were being typed quickly. "You won't believe what just happened. A young girl just shocked everyone." Phones continued to record, but now they were steady, careful not to miss a note. The girl felt none of that. She was thinking about the small room at home, about the mornings she practiced before sunrise, about the times she almost gave up. And she realized something as she played. Those quiet moments had led her here. Every mistake she had corrected alone. Every repeated melody. Every early morning. They were not small after all. They were steps. The second piece slowly came to an end, softer than the first. She let the final note fade naturally, her fingers resting lightly on the keys before lifting them away. The applause returned, even stronger than before. This time there was no shock in it. There was admiration. The organizer stepped closer once more. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked gently. The girl looked down for a moment before answering quietly. "At home." "Do you take lessons?" he asked. She shook her head. A small murmur moved through the nearby crowd. "No lessons?" someone repeated softly. The organizer exchanged a look with another guest, a woman who had been listening very carefully from the side. She seemed thoughtful, as if an idea was forming. "Well," the organizer said warmly, "you have a gift, a real one." The girl did not know how to respond to that. She had never thought of it as a gift. To her, it was simply something she loved. More guests began approaching, offering kind words. "That was beautiful. You played with so much feeling. You should never stop." The earlier laughter was now completely forgotten by the room, but the lesson it carried remained. As the crowd slowly returned to their tables, the atmosphere felt different than before she had played. Lighter, more connected. The piano was no longer just decoration, and she was no longer just a girl standing out of place. She had changed the mood of an entire hall with nothing but her hands and her heart. While she stepped away from the bench, one last look at the piano stayed in her eyes. It was not goodbye. It felt like the beginning of something she had not yet imagined. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this night would follow her long after the applause faded. The applause did not fade quickly that night. Even after people returned to their tables, the energy in the hall remained different. Conversations were no longer about business or fashion or decorations. They were about her. Guests who had never spoken to each other before were now sharing the same sentence. "Did you hear her play? She was unbelievable. I thought she didn't know what she was doing at first." That last sentence was usually followed by an awkward pause. The girl stood quietly near the side of the hall, unsure of where to go next. A few people approached her again, offering kind smiles and gentle words. Some asked simple questions about how long she had been playing. Others just thanked her for the performance. She answered politely, still a little shy. The attention felt new and strange. She was used to practicing alone, not being surrounded by people who wanted to hear her story. Near the stage area, the event organizer was speaking quietly with a well-dressed woman who had been listening very carefully during both performances. She had not clapped the loudest. She had not rushed forward with excitement, but she had watched every movement of the girl's hands with deep focus. Now she nodded slowly as the organizer finished speaking. After a moment, she began walking toward the girl. The girl noticed her coming and straightened slightly. The woman's expression was calm, but serious. "You play with rare feeling," the woman said gently. The girl lowered her eyes. "Thank you. Who is teaching you?" "No one," she replied honestly. "I learn from videos, and I practice at home." The woman studied her face carefully, as if trying to understand something deeper. "Do you have a real piano at home?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "Just a small keyboard. It's old." The woman took a slow breath. She looked back at the grand piano for a moment, then back at the girl. "You deserve proper training," she said quietly. "Not because of tonight's applause, but because of the way you connect to the music. The girl did not know what to say. Proper training sounded like something far away, almost impossible. Before she could respond, the organizer joined them again. "We would like to invite you to perform at our next event," he said warmly. Officially this time. Her eyes widened. "Me? Yes," he replied with a small smile. And not as a surprise guest. For a moment, she felt like she had misunderstood him. The well-dressed woman spoke again. "I work with a music academy in the city. We look for young talent. If you are willing, I would like you to come for an audition. Not to judge you harshly, just to see how we can support you." The word support felt heavier than applause. Felt real. The girl's mind moved quickly. She thought about her parents, about money, about transport, about whether this was even possible. "I don't know if I can afford lessons," she said softly. The woman's voice remained calm. "If you pass the audition, there are scholarships. Full ones." The air around her seemed to pause again. Scholarship. She had heard that word before at school, but never imagined it connected to music. The organizer added, "Talent should not depend on background." The girl felt her throat tighten slightly, not from fear, from something close to hope. Across the hall, the man who had laughed earlier slowly approached. His steps were hesitant. "I owe you an apology," he said, not meeting her eyes at first. "I judged too quickly." She looked at him, surprised. "It's okay," she replied gently. But inside, she understood something important. The apology was not just about her. It was about how easily people assume things without knowing the full story. More guests came forward, offering business cards, encouraging words, even small donations for her future concerts. As one of them joked kindly, she accepted everything with quiet gratitude. But what stayed with her most was not the cards or the invitations. It was the change she had seen in their faces. Earlier that evening, she had been invisible. Then she had been amusing, then doubtful. Now she was respected. All because she had not walked away. As the event slowly came to an end, the hall began to empty. Chairs were moved. Decorations were adjusted. The bright lights dimmed slightly. The girl found herself standing alone near the piano once more. The room was quieter now, almost like it had been before guests arrived. She walked toward the grand piano one last time and gently placed her hand on its smooth surface. "Thank you," she whispered softly, though no one was near enough to hear. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if she would pass the audition. She did not know if life would truly change after tonight. But she knew one thing. She had proven something to herself. She was not small. Her dreams were not silly. And her music was not something to hide. When she finally left the hall, stepping into the cooler night air, the world outside felt strangely calm. Cars passed by. Streetlights glowed softly. Everything looked normal. But inside her, nothing was the same. She walked beside the person she had come with, still quiet, still processing everything. "Are you okay?" they asked gently. She nodded slowly. I think this was important," she said. And it was. Because sometimes, the biggest turning points in life do not begin with loud announcements. They begin with a single brave decision. Like sitting down at a piano when everyone expects you to fail. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she replayed every second in her mind. The laughter, the first note, the silence, the applause, the invitation. She did not smile widely. She did not jump with excitement. Instead, a quiet determination settled in her heart. If an opportunity had opened, she would walk through it. And next time, she would not play to prove anyone wrong. She would play to show who she truly was. The days after the event felt almost unreal to her. First, life looked the same. The small house, the old keyboard in the corner, the sound of neighbors outside, the simple routine of school and home. But something had shifted quietly in the background. The videos recorded that night had begun to spread. She did not even know at first. A classmate approached her during lunch break, holding up a phone. "Is this you?" the classmate asked. On the screen, she saw herself sitting at the grand piano. The lighting was warm. The room looked beautiful. And there she was, playing with full focus, unaware of the camera. Her heart skipped. More students gathered around. "You're famous now," someone joked. She felt shy and quickly asked them to lower the volume. But inside, she felt a mix of emotions. It was strange to see herself from the outside. Strange to see how serious and calm she looked. Later that evening, the well-dressed woman from the event called her family. She spoke kindly, explaining the audition details at the music academy. The word audition sounded heavy again, but this time it did not feel impossible. Her parents listened carefully. They were proud but also nervous. Traveling to the city would take time and money. Missing work was not easy. But when they looked at their daughter's face, they saw something they could not ignore. Hope. They decided to go. The day of the audition arrived quickly. The music academy building was large and quiet. The walls were decorated with pictures of past students who had won competitions and performed on big stages. She walked through the hallway feeling small, but she reminded herself of the night at the event. She had faced laughter before. She had survived it. She could face this too. Inside the audition room stood another grand piano. Not as shiny as the one from the event, but just as powerful. 3 instructors sat behind a table watching calmly. "Take your time," one of them said gently. Her hands felt slightly cold as she sat down. For a brief second, doubt tried to return. What if that night had been luck? What if she failed here? But then she remembered something important. She did not play for applause. She played because she loved the sound. She closed her eyes and began. The notes came softly at first, then stronger. The room was quiet except for the piano. The instructors did not interrupt. They listened. When she finished, there was no loud applause. No cheering crowd. Just silence and serious faces. One instructor leaned forward. "Who taught you to control dynamics like that?" he asked. "I listened carefully," she answered honestly. Another instructor smiled slightly. "You have raw talent," she said. "And more importantly, you have emotion. That cannot always be taught." They thanked her and asked her to wait outside. Those minutes in the hallway felt longer than the entire performance. She stared at her hands. The same hands that had practiced on a keyboard with loose keys. The same hands that had once hesitated in a bright hall full of strangers. Finally, the door opened. The well-dressed woman stepped out first, her expression warm. "Congratulations," she said. The word felt like it echoed in slow motion. "You have been accepted. With a full scholarship." Her breath caught. For a second, she did not move. Then her eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for years. Not tears of sadness. Tears of relief. Tears of proof. Her parents stood beside her, speechless. They were not people who showed emotion loudly, but their faces said everything. Training at the academy was not easy. The first weeks were challenging. She had to learn proper posture, technique, music theory. She discovered how much she still did not know. There were days when her fingers hurt from long practice sessions. Days when she made mistakes in front of others. Days when she felt behind compared to students who had been taking lessons since childhood. But she did not quit. Every time she felt tired, she remembered the laughter from that first night. Not to feel angry, but to remind herself how far she had already come. Months passed. Her playing became stronger, cleaner, more controlled. Yet her instructors often reminded her of something. "Never lose the feeling you had before formal training," they said. That honesty is rare. She understood what they meant. Technique made her better, but heart made her different. 1 year later, the Academy organized a public concert featuring its scholarship students. This time, her name was printed clearly in the program. Her family sat in the front row. The hall was full. When she walked onto the stage, she did not feel small anymore. She felt ready. She sat at the grand piano and placed her hands on the keys. For a brief second, she remembered that first night at the luxury event. The whispers, the doubt, the courage it took to press the first key. Then she began to play. The music flowed through her with confidence and grace. She had grown. not just in skill but in belief. The audience listened deeply. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward just like before. When she finished, the applause filled the hall once again. But this time she was not surprised. She bowed slightly, smiling softly. After the concert, a small girl approached her, looking nervous. "I want to learn piano," the little girl said quietly. "But I don't have lessons." The older girl knelt down slightly to meet her eyes. "Keep practicing," she said gently. "Start with what you have. Don't wait for perfect conditions." As she walked away that night, she realized something powerful. The most important moment of her journey was not the scholarship. It was not the applause. It was not the acceptance. It was the moment she chose not to stand up and walk away when people laughed. That single choice changed everything. Years later, whenever she sits at a grand piano, she still remembers the sound of that first brave note in a room full of doubt. And every time her fingers touch the keys, they carry the same quiet message. Never let someone else decide what you are capable of. Because sometimes, all it takes is a few seconds to astonish the world.